on that issue, can you give us a sense of how she was able to transcend politics? She was above it, wasn't she? Never engaged, but had that authority across the top. I guess that was central to her authority as Queen.
The authority she had was a full and complete understanding of both the strengths and also the limitations of the office. The strength of the office was that it was non-political. It wasn't in our terms Labor or Liberal. She had good relations with Harold Wilson, who was a long-serving Labor Prime Minister of Britain, and she had good relations starting with Churchill and many Conservative Prime Ministers. And she behaved with complete propriety when Australia, unlike any other country that has her as Queen, had a full democratic vote as to whether she should continue when we had the referendum some 20 years ago. Now, she derived her strength from the restraint she always displayed in exercising her powers, and that drew a very positive response across the political spectrum. It's one of her enormous strengths.
Mr. Howard, you mentioned your wife a few times, that she was able to have an audience alongside you with Her Majesty. Can you give us a sense of what the experience was like for Jeanette, your wife, and what she thought of the Queen? Well,
obviously when I had any kind of formal audience, it was just the Queen and myself, as is appropriate, because I was her Australian Prime Minister, as Mr Albanese is her Australian Prime Minister, or was until this morning, Australian time. But Jeanette had very similar attitude towards her as I did, and there were quite a number of occasions where we were guests of her and her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, at various official functions. And she was, as I said earlier, a tremendous conversationalist. And I remember the very first time that I met the Queen as Prime Minister. I'd met her on a number of occasions before, and several times as a Leader of the Opposition on her visits to Australia. And this meeting, I had a formal audience in Windsor Castle a year after I'd been Prime Minister, and we then had a very pleasant lunch. And her mother was still alive, the Queen Mother, and her sister, Princess Margaret, was there as well. And they, all of them, but very particularly the Queen and her mother, exhibited this amazing understanding of Australia and a lively conversation. And Jeanette had a similar experience of being very, very impressed with just how knowledgeable she was, and therefore obviously how affectionate she was towards Australia.
And just finally, you as Prime Minister did attend the funeral of the Queen Mother. You've got a sense of what we should expect, but there is an enormous amount that will go into the farewell for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, well, it'll be an enormous occasion. And she's been on the throne for more than 70 years. And I think it's fair to argue that after the Vatican, the Holy See, the British monarchy is the oldest institution in Western civilization. So it's quite a bit of history. And she's the longest serving monarch by quite a number of years. So it's an amazing event in the history of the United Kingdom, and a big event too in the history of countries like Australia. And I think there's probably been a bit of preparation already been put into it. And but the thing to remember is, most of all, is that we honour somebody today and in the days and weeks ahead who was faithful to some vows she took on her coronation, who lived to the full the promise she made at the age of 21 to serve until 2 days before her death, and that's a pretty impressive demonstration of the wonderful character that Elizabeth II had.
Former Prime Minister John Howard, I appreciate your time and your reflections on Her Majesty. Thank you.